Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm going to draw another seascape in charcoal, and just like in the previous video, I'm going to use a combination of a black and white charcoal pencil on fine sandpaper. I don't normally use rulers and stuff like that, but here I will have to use it because I want the line of the water on the horizon to be both straight and level. I just have to decide where I need to put it, and I'm going to put it a little bit higher, about 1/4 of the height of the paper from the top. Now once that is in place, I can start working on the sky, and I'm going to do that with a white charcoal pencil because the sky is a little bit lighter in value than the rest of the scene. Now as for the pencils I'm using Koh-i-Noor Gioconda black and white charcoal pencils, and these come in several grades. I have 3 grades of each, and for the most part I'm going to use either medium or hard, and I'm going to use the soft ones sparingly. First I need to lay down a sufficient amount of material, and once I have enough of the material to blend, I can start blending with a variety of blending tools, with tortillons, brushes, and even my finger. But like I said, first you need to make sure that you have enough of the material. This sanded surface grips the dust and retains a lot of it, so it's a little bit more difficult to move it around. Anyway, your finger is a great blending tool for this, because it allows you to blend larger areas very quickly and smoothly. And of course, in addition to that, I can use other blending tools. But the important thing here is to make sure that the sky looks smooth without any texture. And here at the bottom, maybe I can put some suggestions of very light clouds in the distance on the horizon. They are barely there, and they're not particularly important for my scene because I'm mostly going to be focusing on the waves. Now I'm going to start working on the surface of the water, and first I'm straightening and cleaning up that line of the water, first with a pencil and then with a brush. And now I'm going to start sketching the shape of the wave, which is going to be in the middle of my scene, the largest wave in the scene, and also the most detailed one. And first I'm going to work with a black charcoal pencil to indicate its shape, but also the shadow areas, because you see, when you look at waves, they have their crest and trough, so they're like hills and valleys in the water, which are always moving, but because they have a raised part and the lower part, there's going to be some shadow in between. So this part of the wave, which is facing away from the light of the sky, is going to be darker. Now, I also need to draw some smaller waves and ripples in the distance, and it's important to make sure that these are getting smaller and smaller as you look further in the distance, and you can sort of make them overlap slightly so that they look more convincing. Now, in this stage I need to sketch out the shape of some of the rocks in the lower part of the scene, but normally when I'm working on the composition I would sketch out most of the elements, but here I first started working on the top part of the scene, and then I just did a rough sketch of some of these rocks, even though I'm going to be modifying them and their shapes are bound to change eventually. And now I'm sketching out the shape of that large wave in the middle, and this time I'm using a white charcoal pencil for that. The crest of this wave is going to be of lighter value, almost white, because it's white splashing water. And like I said, for the most part I'm going to be using a white charcoal pencil for that. So once again, the surface I'm working on is 1000 grit sandpaper. It's a fine sandpaper. And this surface is better than regular paper because it allows me to layer more easily and to put lighter details on top of the darker layers more easily. It allows me to make cleaner marks with cleaner edges with those white pencils when I'm working on top of the darker layers. So I'm finishing the rest of the background area here to the right, just finishing those ripples and waves in the distance before I focus on this larger wave here in the middle. So this crest of the wave is going to be casting a bit of shadow because that part of the wave is raised above the water. And I need to make sure that it's dark enough and there is a sufficient amount of contrast between that top of the crest or the side of the wave and the rest of the surface of the water so that it would stand out against the background. And here I'm curving those lines as I'm drawing the shape of the wave because I'm trying to imitate both the texture and the movement of the water within that wave. So often, but just by using the proper direction of your strokes, you can imitate the movement, not just the shape of things. And of course, once I blend that with a soft synthetic brush, everything becomes smoother and starts to look more realistic, more like the actual surface of the water, because I don't want a really rough or grainy texture there. And I can always add a little bit more shadow in some areas which need to be a little bit darker. I can go back in with softer pencils to make some of these areas extra dark. At the top, as I've already mentioned, we need to have some foamy splashing water, and I can draw that using a white charcoal pencil. First I'm making smaller marks because there is a smaller amount of that foamy splashing water at the top of the wave here, and then as we move further to the right it starts really getting foamier and foamier because that part of the wave is already spilling over to the other side. So you have to try to understand the movement of the wave. It doesn't have to be perfect, but like I said, you have to try to capture the general idea. Now the good thing about drawing this foamy splashing water is that it's actually not that difficult when you have a white charcoal pencil. If I were working on regular paper and if I were working just with conventional charcoal, I would have to use erasers or reserve the white space. That works to a certain degree, but for some of these smaller, finer details like these droplets or groups of droplets, it's very difficult to achieve that effect just by using erasers, because if you're using pencil erasers like Koh-i-Noor pencil eraser or a Tombow Mono Zero eraser, you have to keep cleaning them up or sharpening them so that they can create clean marks. And if you're using a kneaded eraser, you have to keep reshaping and remolding that kneaded eraser, which is both time consuming and a little bit tedious, to be honest. So working with a white pencil is a lot easier, but the thing is that if I were working on regular paper, I could probably achieve a similar effect, but some of these finer, smaller details would be very difficult to achieve because there would be more muddying with the layers underneath. On a rough textured surface like sanded paper, it's easier to get those clean marks. That is why most of the pastel artists prefer to work on sanded paper, even though most of them work on higher quality, artist quality sanded papers such as Pastel Matte and UArt. But I assure you that this fine sandpaper, 1000 grit sandpaper, works just as well, and it's very durable. It's pretty much indestructible, and it's a great surface for drawing. And if you can't find that, you can also prime regular paper with clear gesso, because that too will create that textured surface that you need to create this sort of detail and to layer your pencils the way I am doing now. For those smaller droplets, I'm using what I like to call the woodpecker technique, because I just dab the surface of the paper with a pencil, creating these small marks like dots. And also, in addition to that filmy part of the crest, here on the side of the wave I can also add a few touches of that film, which is also a very nice effect that makes the wave look more realistic, because as the water is moving, it will be casting a little bit of that foamy water, because the waves and the ripples are colliding all the time and the water is splashing all around. And at the bottom of that wave there's going to be some of these streaks or streams or foam, which are mostly white, but I can't make them completely white, so they need to be a little bit more subdued in terms of value. Some parts of them can be a little bit lighter, some parts of them are a little bit darker, so you need a little bit of variation in there so that it looks more convincing. And I was kind of surprised at how easy it was to create that effect just by using a white charcoal pencil. Now, to soften that a little bit, I'm using a cotillion to smear or smudge some of those lines a little bit so that the movement of the water looks a little bit more natural. Because some of these lines, if they're too clean, they look just like white lines, so they don't look very natural. But when you use a blending tool, it sort of integrates them better into the rest of the scene. And I'm moving on to the right side of this wave, and like I said, this part of the wave is already spilling over to the other side, and it's going to be all splashing water. It's going to be almost all white, very filmy. I can also add a little bit more shadow under that crest of the wave to make it more three-dimensional and to make it stand out a little bit more. And I'll just keep creating this filmy effect just by dragging my pencil and shading using the broad side of my pencil, kind of holding it sideways to create that effect. And I can also draw some of these streaks of filmy water which are stretching out from the crest of the wave onto the foot of the wave as it's sort of bending and spilling over to the other side. And you can see that on the right side at the bottom the wave is crashing against one of those rocks, so that's where we're going to have the largest amount of that film. Now, another trick that I'm using to create variation in value, by the way, I'm moving on to the left side of the scene and kind of drawing that splashing water around individual rocks. Another trick that I'm using to create that variation in value between the parts of those waves which are supposed to be completely white and those which are supposed to be just a little bit darker is I'm using the blending tools to allow the background color of the paper to break through, or I'm simply using some of the harder pencils because they're not going to be as bright. And for the brightest part of that splashing water, I'm using the softest white charcoal pencil I have, because that's going to give me snow white details. And it's important to have that range of value, because even in those foamy areas of the waves you will have a range of value which shows that some parts of that splashing water are in the shadow, so they're a little bit darker, and others are at the top, more exposed to the light source. It's the same thing with these rocks. They're pretty dark in comparison to the white splashing water, but they also have their darker side and their lighter side. Their shadow side is facing down and to the side, facing away from the light source, which is coming from above and a little bit more from the right. So that part of the surface is going to be a little bit darker, and the part of the surface which is facing up and to the right is going to be a bit lighter because it's facing the light source. It's a little bit closer to the light source. Now in this part of the scene, in the lower part of the scene, because I'm pretty happy with the way the wave turned out, I'm going to start working on these rocks in the foreground. And my idea is to draw a bunch of rocks, some smaller, some larger, or very irregular shapes, and to have that white foamy water kind of flowing around them like a stream as the waves are pushing that water onto those rocks. If you want to check out my reference, I will put the reference in the description, but I didn't use a single reference. I kind of put something together because in one photo I liked the wave, in the other I liked the rocks, and eventually I ended up modifying the rocks altogether. So the thing is that you have to make modifications and you have to try to adapt the reference to the composition that you like, and to the general idea that you have, how you want the landscape to look. Anyway, I started working on some of these larger rocks here in the middle, and these are important because these are going to be fairly dark and they're going to be creating a lot of contrast and tension with the foamy water behind them. So I'm going to shade those in a similar manner as I did that jutting rock on the left. But this here we'll have a group of rocks, and I'm going to shade the shadow area on all of them like I'm doing now, mostly putting a little bit more shadow at the bottom, and then I put some random details, some random cracks and stuff like that on the rest of the lighter part of the rock, to make it look more interesting and to make its surface more irregular and to make it look more like an actual rock. Here at the bottom again I'm using the charcoal pencil, and here of course, because these are darker values, I'm using softer charcoal pencils to indicate where some of those darkest shadow areas are. And I'm also going to have some of these darker rocks on the right as well. Here I started modifying the shape of some of the rocks because I realized that I had too many of these smaller shapes in the foreground, kind of competing for the focus with the middle part of the scene, and I wanted to simplify it a little bit. So I went ahead and started simplifying it by grouping together some of the shapes, and I modified the shape of this rock to the left. And after that, once I kind of grouped or bunched these darker shapes together a little bit so that they're a little bit simpler, I started working on some more details of this splashing water. I started drawing these streams of water that is spilling over the rocks, and of course in between the rocks, because like I said, the waves are crashing against that rocky shore and pushing that water between the rocks. It's the foamy water is flowing between the rocks. And here I started experimenting a little bit. I wanted to draw like small streams of water spilling over the side of the rock here, but I wasn't really happy with it. Not just because I didn't really like the shapes, I didn't think they looked super convincing, but also the main problem with them was that I felt that they were kind of spoiling that dark shape in the middle, and I wanted that dark shape to be a little bit simpler and to create contrast with the middle part of the scene, which is lighter. So here I modified the shape of the rock a little bit to make it look a bit more angular and a bit more natural, and defined the contrast between the lighter areas and the shadow areas. and then added some details on top, like some cracks and some random irregularities in the surface of the rock. And I did the same thing with the other smaller rocks at the bottom of the scene. Eventually I decided to remove that flowing water on these rocks in the middle altogether to simplify it as best as I can, because like I said, I liked that simple dark shape against the lighter splashing wave a little bit better, so I decided to go with that. I don't know if that was the right decision. You'll let me know in the comment, but these are just these are just some of the decisions you make during the drawing process. So here I went on to refine both the shapes of the rocks and the splashing water around them, kind of drawing some of these smaller details like these droplets of water which are splashing upwards. And for these I didn't use the woodpecker technique just by stabbing the pencil in the paper. I used a little bit more of a deliberate motion by making these smaller marks and kind of grouping these dots together so that they look like splashing foamy water as best as I could. And I put those all around so that the scene looks more realistic, and also modified the shape of some of those waves at the bottom, as well as the edges and the shapes of some of those rocks. I also did a little bit of erasing on these rocks at the bottom to define the light side a bit better, and then I added some details with a black charcoal pencil. And I didn't really like this smaller shape here, so I decided to eliminate it and just put in some more of the waves and that splashing water. So you can see that I did quite a bit of simplification in my scene just to achieve cleaner, simpler contrasts and a composition that is easier to understand for the viewer, or at least that was my intention. Anyway, now I'm just gonna draw a bunch of these dots, and I'm gonna enhance the appearance of that splashing water. I want to make the viewer feel like they're there close to those rocks, close to those splashing waves. That's why I'm putting in so many of these white dots of splashing water, and that will pretty much complete the scene. If you like this video, don't forget to check out my other videos, because I have lots of landscapes. And also give me a like and comment, let me know what you think. The scene is now done. The drawing is done. I put my signature with a white charcoal pencil in the lower right corner. And that's pretty much it. So I hope you like this seascape in black and white charcoal pencils. If you want to see the full narrated video of this drawing, you should check out my Patreon. Thanks for watching, and I'm going to see you in the next one. Bye for now.